Commander HFY sat in the cold metal chair, his scaled hands resting on the smooth table. The debriefing room was white and empty, except for the table and chairs. 3 high-ranking officers sat across from him. Their faces showed no emotion. As they waited for him to speak, the war with the humans was over. 6 months had passed since the ceasefire was signed, but HFY still woke up every night thinking about what he had seen. The images would not leave his mind. Human soldiers fighting in ways no one had ever seen before. Human tactics that made no sense until they worked perfectly. "Begin your report, Commander," said Admiral Vorthak. His voice was deep and commanding. He had fought in 12 different wars across the galaxy. He had conquered 7 different species for the Catherian Empire. But he had never fought humans. HFY looked down at his hands. His claws were still sharp, but they felt useless now. Everything felt useless after fighting humans for 2 years. "The humans are not like other species," HFY began. His voice was quiet and tired. "When we attacked the Zalonians, they surrendered after losing half their fleet. When we fought the Drakmori, they lasted 3 months before giving up. The humans fought differently." "How different?" asked General Kishina. She leaned forward in her chair, her red eyes fixed on HFY's face. "They never gave up," HFY said, "even when they should have, even when it made no sense to keep fighting. They would lose a battle and somehow become stronger because of it." The 3rd officer, Colonel Vex Wren, made notes on his datapad. He had been studying human warfare since the ceasefire began. Every report from the front lines said the same thing. Humans fought in impossible ways. "Tell us about your first encounter with human forces." Admiral Vorthak ordered .ZEX single quotes HA. I closed his eyes for a moment. He could still see it clearly. "The Battle of Kepler Station." It was supposed to be simple. 1 small human mining station, a few hundred defenders at most. His fleet had over 3,000 soldiers and the best weapons in the galaxy. "It was Kepler Station," HFY said. "A mining outpost in the outer rim of their territory. Intelligence reports said it had maybe 500 humans working there. Most of them were miners and engineers. Only 50 were actual soldiers." "Your force consisted of how many?" General Kishana asked. 3,000 soldiers, 12 assault ships, full orbital support." HFY's voice grew quieter. "It should have been over in 3 hours. We had done the same attack pattern on 40 other stations. It always worked." Admiral Vorthak nodded. The Catherian military was famous for its efficiency. They had conquered half the galaxy using proven tactics and superior technology. Every battle was planned down to the smallest detail. Every outcome was predicted by their war computers. What went wrong? Colonel Vex Wren asked. "Nothing went wrong," HFY said. "The humans just did things we had never seen before. Things our computers could not predict." He stood up from his chair and walked to the small window. Outside, the stars looked peaceful. But HFY knew that somewhere out there, humans were still watching, still learning, still preparing for the next time they might have to fight. "We began the attack at dawn, their local time," HFY continued. "Standard orbital bombardment first. We destroyed their shield generators and communication arrays. Then we sent in the first wave of soldiers." "Standard procedure," General Kishana noted. "Yes, but the humans were not following standard procedures." HFY turned back to face the officers. "When our soldiers landed, they expected to find confused and scared defenders. Instead, they found empty buildings." Colonel Vex Wren stopped writing. "Empty?" The humans had evacuated all non-combat personnel to the lower mining tunnels, but they did not just hide them. They turned the entire upper level of the station into a trap. HFY began pacing back and forth. The memory made him restless. He had commanded thousands of battles, but none like this one. Our soldiers entered the main complex. Everything looked normal at first. Then the explosions started. But not random explosions. Carefully planned ones. The humans had rigged their own station to collapse in specific ways. They destroyed their own base? Admiral Vorthak asked. Not destroyed. Changed. They made it into a maze. Corridors that used to be straight were now blocked. Rooms that used to connect were now separated by tons of debris. Our soldiers could not use their standard formation tactics. General Keshana leaned back in her chair. Clever, but not impossible to overcome. That was just the beginning, Zexhai said. As our soldiers tried to navigate the new layout, the real fighting started. The human defenders were led by a captain named Jake Morrison. His security chief was a woman called Lisa Carter. They had 50 trained soldiers and maybe 200 armed miners. Against 3,000 of our best troops, Colonel Lexron said. Yes, but the humans did not fight like they were outnumbered. They fought like they had already won. Zexhai said, "Back down." His memories of that battle were still sharp and painful. Captain Morrison divided his people into small groups. Each group knew exactly what to do. They did not try to hold territory like normal defenders. Instead, they moved constantly. They would attack our soldiers from one direction and disappear, and attack from somewhere else. Hit-and-run tactics, Admiral Vorthak said, common among weaker forces. But not like this, Zexhai replied. The humans used their knowledge of the station in ways we had never seen. They knew every pipe, every vent, every maintenance tunnel. They could appear anywhere at any time. He paused and rubbed his temples. The headaches had started during the battle and never really stopped. Lisa Carter, the security chief, had prepared for this attack for months. She had studied our tactics from previous battles. She knew how we would approach the station. She had prepared countermeasures for everything we might do. How could she know our tactics? General Keshana asked. The humans are very good at learning, Zexhai said. Every time we conquered another species, they watched. They studied our methods. They learned our weaknesses. Colonel Lexron made more notes. What specific tactics did they use? Everything became a weapon, Zexhai answered. When their ammunition ran low, they used mining equipment as weapons. Drill bits became spears. Excavation charges became grenades. They turned their industrial tools into military equipment. The room was quiet for a moment. The three officers had never heard of anything like this. But the most disturbing thing was how they used their environment, Zexhai continued. When our soldiers took cover behind walls, the humans would vent atmosphere from the rooms next door. The sudden pressure change would knock our soldiers off balance. They damaged their own station further? Admiral Vorthak asked. They did not care about the station anymore. They only cared about stopping us. Captain Morrison told his people that the station was already lost. Their job was to make us pay as high a price as possible for taking it. Zexhai stood up again. He needed to move when he talked about this part. On the third day of fighting, something happened that changed everything. One of our assault teams was pinned down in the main corridor. They were using the bodies of fallen human defenders as cover from enemy fire. Standard battlefield practice. General Keshana said. Yes, but the humans saw what we were doing. Lieutenant Ben Harris, one of Morrison's soldiers, did something that still gives me nightmares. The three officers waited for him to continue. He rigged the bodies of his own fallen comrades with explosives. When our soldiers took cover behind them, the bodies exploded. We lost an entire squad in one moment. The room fell silent. None of the officers had expected this. The humans turned their own dead into weapons, Zexhai said quietly. That was when I knew we were not fighting a normal enemy. We were fighting something completely different. Admiral Vorthak leaned forward in his chair. Continue with your report, Commander. What happened after the explosive bodies? Zex-Hi walked back to his seat, but did not sit down. The memory of what came next made him too restless to stay still. The battle should have ended there, he said. Any normal species would have surrendered after losing so many soldiers. But the humans kept fighting. Captain Morrison gathered his remaining people and told them something I will never forget. What did he say? Colonel Dexren asked. He said that every minute they held us was another minute for human fleets to prepare. He said their job was not to win the battle. Their job was to make sure we learned nothing useful from it. General Kishona made a note. They were buying time for their military. No, Zex-Hi said. They were doing something much more dangerous. They were making sure that our victory would be worthless. He finally sat down, but his hands would not stop moving. They tapped against the table as he spoke. On the fourth day, our engineers reported something strange. The humans had been tampering with the station's power systems, but not to shut them down. They had been redirecting power to parts of the station we had not reached yet. For what purpose? Admiral Vorthak asked. Lisa Carter had been preparing surprises for us. The mining station had large industrial furnaces for processing ore. She had turned them into weapons. Zex-Hi closed his eyes and tried to push away the memory of what he had seen. When our soldiers finally reached the lower levels, they found corridors filled with superheated air. The humans had vented the furnaces into the ventilation system. Our armor protected us from the heat, but it slowed us down. We had to move carefully or risk overheating. Clever use of available resources, General Kishona said. But that was not the worst part. While we were dealing with the heat, the humans attacked us from directions we thought were impossible. Colonel Vex Rhine looked up from his notes. Impossible. How? The mining station had ore chutes that ran through the entire structure, large tubes designed to move heavy materials. Lisa Carter's people used them as highways. They could travel from the bottom of the station to the top without using the main corridors. Zex-Hi stood up again and walked to the window. The stars outside reminded him of the lights he had seen moving through those chutes during the battle. Our soldiers would secure a room and think it was safe. Then humans would appear from the ore chutes, attack, and disappear again before we could respond. We never knew where they would come from next. How long did this continue? Admiral Vorth asked. 7 more days, but each day was worse than the last. The humans were learning our patterns while we learned nothing about theirs. Zex-Hi turned back to face the officers. On day 8, Captain Morrison tried something that almost worked. He sent a small group of soldiers to attack our command ship. The 3 officers looked surprised. They left the station? General Keshina asked. A team of 6 humans, led by Morrison himself. They used a small mining shuttle that our sensors barely detected. The shuttle was designed for moving between asteroids, so it looked like space debris on our screens. How did they plan to attack? A fully armed battleship with 6 soldiers? Colonel Vexren asked. They did not plan to attack it. They planned to capture it. The room was quiet for a moment. The idea seemed impossible. Morrison's team landed in our shuttle bay. They killed the guards quickly and quietly. Then they split into 2 groups. 3 soldiers went to disable our communications. The other 3 went to the bridge. Zex-Hi sat back down. This part of the story was easier to tell because it had failed. The team that went to communications succeeded. For 20 minutes, we could not contact our other ships or our ground forces. The team that went to the bridge almost reached the main computer. What stopped them? Admiral Vorthak asked. Morrison himself. He stayed behind to buy time for his soldiers to escape He fought 30 of our security troops alone. He killed 8 of them before we finally brought him down. General Keshana made another note, sacrificing himself for the mission. Yes, but the mission was not what we thought. We found out later that the attack on the command ship was not meant to succeed. It was meant to distract us. Distract you? From what? While we were dealing with Morrison's attack, Lisa Carter was preparing the station's final surprise. She had been working on it since the battle began. Zexhai rubbed his temples again. The headache was getting worse. The mining station had explosive charges for breaking up large asteroids. Carter had spent 8 days connecting all of them into one massive bomb. She was going to destroy the entire station while our soldiers were still inside. Colonel Lex Wren stopped writing. She would have killed her own people too. She told them what she was planning. Every human defender volunteered to stay. They were all willing to die if it meant taking 3,000 of our soldiers with them. The officers exchanged looks. This was beyond anything they had encountered in previous wars. What prevented the explosion? Admiral Vorthak asked. Pure luck. One of our engineers noticed that the power readings from the station were wrong. Too much energy was flowing to the lower levels. We evacuated our forces just in time. The explosion still happened? Yes, the entire station was destroyed. But Carter had made one mistake. She waited too long to activate the charges. She wanted to make sure all of our soldiers were inside before she triggered the explosion. Zexhai walked back to the window. The memory of that explosion still lit up his dreams. When the station exploded, the blast was visible from orbit. The humans had turned their home into the largest bomb any of us had ever seen. Even though we escaped, the explosion damaged 2 of our ships. So the humans achieved their goal, General Keshana said. Worse than that, they taught us that capturing human positions would never be safe. Every building, every room, every piece of equipment could be a trap. Colonel Lex Wren looked through his notes. How many human defenders survived? None. Lisa Carter and her remaining soldiers died in the explosion. But before they died, they sent a message to other human colonies. What kind of message? A detailed report of everything they had learned about our tactics, our weapons, our weaknesses. They had been studying us just as much as we had been fighting them. Zexhai sat down heavily in his chair. The Battle of Kepler Station lasted 11 days. We lost 800 soldiers. 6 ships were damaged. And the humans learned enough about us to make every future battle more difficult. But you won the battle, Admiral Vorthak pointed out. Did we? We captured a pile of burning metal in empty space. The humans we were fighting were dead, but they had sent everything they learned to other human forces. We gained nothing and lost almost a quarter of our soldiers. General Keshona closed her notebook. This explains why subsequent battles became more challenging. Every human colony we attacked after Kepler Station was better prepared. They knew how we moved our ships. They knew how our soldiers fought. They knew our weapons and our tactics. Zexhai looked at each of the officers. The humans at Kepler Station did not fight to win. They fought to teach. Every move they made was designed to force us to show our capabilities. They were gathering intelligence even while they were dying. Intelligence for what purpose? Colonel, Lex Wren asked. To make sure that the next time humans fought us, they would be ready, and they were. Every battle after Kepler Station was harder than the one before. Admiral Vorthak stood up. We will need detailed tactical reports on all subsequent engagements. Yes, sir, but I must warn you. What happened at Kepler Station was just the beginning. The humans learned from every battle. By the end of the war, they were fighting in ways that made Kepler Station look simple. The 3 officers left the room to discuss what they had heard. Zexhai remained alone, staring out at the stars and remembering Captain Morrison's last words before he died. Every minute you spend fighting us makes us stronger. The next morning, Zexhai returned to the debriefing room. The 3 officers were already waiting for him. Admiral Vorthak had new files on the table. Colonel Vexrhine's data pad was full of notes from the previous day. "Commander, we need to hear about the planet-side campaigns," General Kishina said. "Specifically your experiences on New Terra." Zexhai sat down slowly. New Terra had been worse than Kepler Station. Much worse. New Terra was supposed to be our first major victory, he began. A planet with 12 million humans. 3 large cities and dozens of smaller towns. Rich farmland and industrial centers. Your orders were to capture the planet intact, Admiral Vorthak said. Yes, the planet was valuable. We needed its resources for the war effort. High Command wanted the cities undamaged and the population alive to work the farms and factories. Colonel Vex Wren looked up from his datapad. What went wrong? The humans made the planet worthless before we could take it. Zexhai stood up and began pacing. He could not sit still when talking about New Terra. The resistance was led by Colonel Amy Rodriguez. She commanded the Planetary Defense Force. When our invasion fleet arrived, she did something no military commander had ever done before. What did she do? General Keshina asked. She ordered the complete evacuation of all 3 major cities. 12 million people abandoned their homes in less than a week. The officers looked confused. Evacuation to where? Admiral Vorthak asked. Into the wilderness. Into the mountains and forests. But they did not just run away and hide. Rodriguez had a plan. Zexhai walked to the window and looked out at the stars. The humans took everything with them. Every piece of useful technology. Every vehicle. Every tool. Every weapon. They stripped their cities bare. Standard scorched earth tactics, General Keshona noted. No, this was different. They did not just remove useful items. They booby-trapped everything they left behind. Colonel Vexrhine stopped writing. Booby-trapped how? Rodriguez had an engineer named Major Chris Sullivan. He was an expert at building things. But for this war, he became an expert at destroying things. Zexhai turned back to face the officers. Sullivan spent months before our arrival preparing surprises. Every building we entered could be a trap. Every piece of equipment we tried to use could explode. Give us specific examples, Admiral Vorthak ordered. When our soldiers entered the first city, they found the power plant still running. Our engineers tried to connect it to our own systems. The moment they made the connection, the entire plant overloaded and exploded. General Keshina made a note. Sabotage of critical infrastructure. But Sullivan had been more clever than that. The explosion was not random. It was designed to take out our main communications hub, which we had set up exactly where he predicted we would put it. Zexhai sat back down. The memory of that explosion still bothered him. How could he predict where you would place your equipment? Colonel Vexrun asked. The humans had been studying our invasion tactics for months. They knew we always put communications hubs in the highest buildings with the best view of the surrounding area. Sullivan had rigged every such building in the city. Admiral Vorthak leaned forward. How many casualties? 43 soldiers and engineers in the first explosion. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, we lost equipment and personnel every day. Vehicles that exploded when we started them. Buildings that collapsed when we entered. Them. Water supplies that were poisoned. The humans were fighting a guerrilla war, General Keshana said. Yes, but not like any guerrilla war we had seen before. Most resistance fighters try to hide from the occupying force. These humans made the occupying force afraid to touch anything. Zexhai rubbed his temples. The headaches from New Terra had been the worst. Colonel Rodriguez divided her people into small groups scattered across the planet. Each group had a specific mission. Some groups attacked our supply lines. Others gathered intelligence. But the most dangerous groups were the ones that made the planet itself fight against us. What do you mean? Colonel Lexron asked. Rodriguez had a team led by Lieutenant Danny Walsh. Their job was to turn the planet's ecosystem into a weapon. The officers looked puzzled. New Terra had large forests and many rivers. Walsh's team poisoned water sources near our bases. They set forest fires that would spread toward our positions. They released local animals that had been trained to attack. Our soldiers, trained animals? Admiral Vorthak asked. The humans had been living on New Terra for 50 years. They knew every animal species on the planet. Walsh's team captured and trained large predators to recognize the smell of our soldiers and attack on sight. General Keshona looked up from her notes. That seems impossible. I saw it myself. Packs of wolf-like creatures that would attack our patrols and then disappear into the forest. Flying animals that would dive at our aircraft and damage the engines. The humans had turned the entire planet into an enemy. Zexhai stood up again and walked to the corner of the room. But the worst part was the psychological warfare. Psychological warfare? Colonel Vexren asked. Rodriguez had a human named Dr. Helen Brooks. She was a specialist in understanding how minds work. Her job was to drive our soldiers crazy. Admiral Vorthak frowned. How? Dr. Brooks had studied recordings of our previous battles. She learned how our soldiers thought and what scared them. Then she used that knowledge against us. Zexhai's hands began to shake slightly. Even now, months later, thinking about Dr. Brooks made him nervous. She would broadcast sounds over our communication channels. Sounds that seemed normal at first, but gradually became disturbing. The sound of our own soldiers screaming. Sound of our ships exploding. The sound of our weapons failing. Simple audio harassment, General Keshona said. No, she was more clever than that. The sounds were mixed with real communications from our command centers. Our soldiers never knew if what they were hearing was real or fake. Colonel Vex Rhine looked concerned. What effect did this have? Our soldiers became afraid to trust their own radios. They stopped communicating with each other. Some units became completely isolated because they thought their orders were fake. Zexhai sat back down heavily. But Dr. Brooks' worst weapon was her analysis of our battle patterns. What do you mean? Admiral Vorthak asked. She studied how we moved our troops, how we planned our attacks, how we responded to different situations. Then she predicted what we would do next. The room was quiet for a moment. Colonel Rodriguez would receive reports from Dr. Brooks telling her exactly where our soldiers would be at specific times. The humans could set up ambushes days in advance because they knew where we were going to go. That level of prediction seems impossible, General Keshina said. Dr. Brooks was very smart. She realized that we always followed the same patterns. We had been so successful in previous wars that we never changed our methods. The humans used our own success against us. Zexhai walked back to the window. After 3 months on New Terra, our soldiers were afraid to leave their bases. They knew that every patrol could be walking into a trap. Every mission could be predicted by the humans. How did the campaign end? Colonel Vexran asked. It did not end. We abandoned the planet. The officers looked shocked. Abandoned it? Admiral Vorthak asked. High Command decided that New Terra was not worth the cost. We were losing more resources trying to hold it than we could ever gain from capturing it. What about the human population? General Keshina asked. Still alive, still free. Colonel Rodriguez had achieved something that no military commander in galactic history had ever done. She had made her own planet too expensive for the enemy to occupy. Zex-Hi turned back to face the officers. When we left New Terra, we had learned nothing useful about human tactics. But the humans had learned everything about ours. Every unit that fought on New Terra was studied and analyzed by Dr. Brooks and her team. The intelligence was shared with other human forces. Colonel Vex-Wren asked. Yes. By the time we attacked our next target, the humans there already knew all of our weaknesses. They had detailed plans for countering every tactic we might use. Admiral Vorthak stood up. How many other planets did you attack after New? Terra? 7. Each one was harder than the last. Each one cost us more soldiers and resources. The humans were learning faster than we were. General Keshna closed her notebook. It sounds like the humans were fighting a completely different kind of war. They were not fighting to win individual battles, Zex-Hi said. They were fighting to make sure that every battle taught them something new about us. They turned every defeat into education, every loss into preparation for the next fight. The officers looked at each other with concern. Commander, Admiral, Vorthak said, we need to hear about the siege of Haven Colony. That was where the war really ended, was it not? Zex-Hi nodded slowly. Haven Colony was where I learned the truth about human warfare. It was where I realized that we were not fighting an enemy. We were creating one. 3 days later, Zex-Hi entered the debriefing room for what he knew would be the hardest session. Admiral Vorthak, General Keshna, and Colonel Vex-Wren were waiting with thick files spread across the table. The Haven Colony files. Commander, we need the complete story of Haven Colony, Admiral Vorthak said. High Command wants to understand why the siege lasted so long. Zex-Hi sat down, but immediately stood up again. He could not discuss Haven Colony while sitting still. Haven Colony was humanity's last major stronghold, he began. 1 million civilians. 50,000 soldiers. General Marcus Stone commanded the defense. Your orders were to capture the colony quickly, General Keshua said. Yes, High Command believed that if we could take Haven Colony, the remaining human forces would surrender. We brought our largest fleet, 200 ships, 100,000 soldiers. Colonel Vex-Wren looked up from his notes. Against 50,000 defenders. The numbers should have made it simple, Zex-Hi said. But the humans had been preparing for this battle for over a year. They knew we were coming. He walked to the window and stared out at the stars. Haven Colony was out there somewhere, still free, still defiant. General Stone had an engineer named Katie Lewis. She was the smartest human I ever encountered. While we were fighting on other planets, she was turning Haven Colony into something that had never existed before. What do you mean? Admiral Vorthak asked. She turned the entire colony into a living fortress, not just defensive walls and weapons. A colony could adapt and change while we were attacking it. The officers looked confused. Give us specific examples, General Keshana said. When we began orbital bombardment, we expected to destroy their power grid and communications. Instead, we found that they had no centralized power system. Zex-Hi turned back to face the officers. Katie Lewis had spent months building hundreds of small power generators throughout the colony. When we destroyed some of them, the others automatically increased their output to compensate. Redundant systems, Colonel Vex-Wren noted. More and redundant, smart systems. The power grid could reroute itself in real time. We would destroy a section of the colony, and within hours, the remaining sections would reorganize to work without it. Admiral Vorthak leaned forward. What about their food and water supplies? That was where Katie Lewis showed her true genius. The colony had been built on the surface, like most human settlements. But Lewis had spent a year building a second colony underground. Zex-Hi began pacing back and forth. When the siege began, the humans moved all their civilians to the underground levels. But the surface colony continued to function. We were fighting against buildings that had no people in them. Empty buildings? General Keshana asked. Automated defenses. Lewis had filled the surface colony with machines that could fight without human operators. We were wasting ammunition and soldiers attacking robots, while the real defenders were safe below ground. Colonel Vex Wren stopped writing. How long before you realized this? 3 weeks. By then, we had lost thousands of soldiers, fighting empty buildings. But when we finally understood what was happening, Lewis had another surprise ready. HFY walked to the corner of the room. This part of the story always made him feel trapped. The underground colony was not just a hiding place. It was a factory. Lewis had moved all of Haven Colony's manufacturing equipment below ground. While we were attacking the surface, the humans were building new weapons and defenses underground. They were manufacturing during the siege? Admiral Vorthek asked. Every day. They had mining equipment that could dig new tunnels. Manufacturing systems that could build new robots. Even laboratories where they were developing new types of weapons. General Keshana made notes quickly. What types of weapons? Weapons designed specifically to fight us. Lewis had studied our armor and found its weak points. She built projectiles that could penetrate our defenses. She created explosives that could damage our ships. HFY sat down heavily. But the worst part was that the colony kept growing during the siege. Growing? Colonel Lexran asked. Lewis kept digging new tunnels and building new sections underground. After 2 months of siege, the underground colony was twice as large as the original surface colony. The officers exchanged worried looks. Every week that we spent trying to capture Haven Colony, the humans became stronger. They had more space, more weapons, more defenses. Admiral Vorthak stood up. Why did the siege continue for 6 months? Because we could not find a way to attack the underground colony. Every entrance was heavily defended. Every tunnel was filled with traps. Lewis had made it impossible for us to reach the civilians or the real military targets. HFY walked back to the window. General Stone's strategy was perfect. He kept us focused on attacking the surface, while the real colony grew stronger below ground. What about cutting off their supplies? General Keshana asked. They had no external supplies to cut off. Lewis had built everything they needed underground. Food production systems, water recycling systems, air purification systems. The colony was completely self-sufficient. Colonel Vex Rhine looked through his files. Our reports mentioned several failed assault attempts. Yes, High Command ordered direct attacks on the underground entrances. We lost hundreds of soldiers in each attempt. HFY turned back to the officers. The humans had learned from every battle we had fought against them. They knew exactly how we would attack and had prepared countermeasures for everything. But surely our superior numbers should have eventually succeeded, Admiral Vorthak said. Numbers did not matter when we could only attack through narrow tunnel entrances. The humans could defend those entrances with small groups of soldiers, while keeping most of their forces in reserve. General Keshana closed her notebook. When did you realize the siege was failing? Month 4. We received intelligence reports that other human colonies were using the time to prepare their own defenses. Every day we spent at Haven Colony was a day that other humans had to learn from our tactics. HFY sat back down. But the breaking point came when Sergeant Alex Turner led a mission that changed everything. What kind of mission? Colonel Vex Wren asked. Turner was one of General Stone's best soldiers. He volunteered to lead a small team to capture one of our command ships. The officers looked surprised. During the siege? Admiral Vorthak asked. Turner realized that we were so focused on the colony that we were not properly defending our own ships. He took 6 soldiers and used an old mining shuttle to approach our fleet. How did they get past our defenses? General Keshina asked. They disguised their shuttle as space debris. Our sensors were focused on watching for attacks from the colony, not from random pieces of metal floating in space. Zexhai rubbed his temples. The memory of Turner's mission still gave him headaches. Turner's team reached the command ship Eternal. Victory. They killed the guards and fought their way to the bridge, but they did not try to destroy the ship. What did they do? Colonel Vexren asked. They captured the ship's communication system. For 6 hours, Turner's team had control of our primary communications hub. Admiral Vorthak looked concerned. What did they transmit? Surrender terms, but not the kind of surrender terms we expected. Zexhai stood up and walked to the center of the room. Turner broadcast a message to our entire fleet. He said that Haven Colony was prepared to end the siege, but only if we agreed to their conditions. What conditions? General Keshina asked. Complete withdrawal from all human territory, a formal ceasefire agreement, and most importantly, a promise that we would never attack humans again. The room was quiet for a moment. Turner was not asking for mercy, Zexhai continued. He was demanding victory. He said that if we did not agree to their terms, Haven Colony would activate something called the Final Protocol. What was the Final Protocol? Colonel Vexran asked. We never found out. But Turner's message included detailed scans of our fleet, positions, our troop strengths, and our supply lines. Information that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. Admiral Vorthak sat back down. How did they get that intelligence? Katie Lewis had been intercepting our communications for months. She had broken our encryption codes. She knew everything about our military operations. Turner's message also included something else, Zexhai said quietly. Proof that Haven Colony was in contact with every other human colony in the galaxy. They were sharing intelligence and coordinating their defenses. General Kesnow looked up from her notes. The siege was never about just one colony. No, it was about buying time for all of humanity to prepare for war. Every day we spent at Haven Colony was a day that humans across the galaxy used to build defenses and plan attacks. Zexhai walked back to his chair, but did not sit down. After Turner's broadcast, High Command had to make a choice. Continue the siege and risk fighting the entire human species, or negotiate for peace. They chose negotiation, Admiral Vorthak said. Yes, because Turner had shown us something that terrified our leadership. The humans were not just defending themselves anymore. They were preparing to attack us. The final day briefing session began at dawn. Zexhai entered the room to find the 3 officers looking tired and worried. They had spent the night reading reports and analyzing everything he had told them. Commander, Admiral Vorthak said, we need to understand what happened during your capture at Haven Colony. Your report mentions that the humans showed you something that changed your perspective on the entire war. Zexhai sat down slowly. This was the part of his story that he had been dreading, the part that had convinced him the war needed to end. I was captured during the final week of the siege, he began. My shuttle was shot down while conducting reconnaissance over the colony. I survived the crash, but was taken prisoner by a human patrol. Who captured you? General Keshona asked. Commander Ryan Mitchell and his team. Mitchell was one of General Stone's senior officers. When they found me, I expected to be interrogated and then killed. Colonel Vexren looked up from his notes, but that did not happen. No. Instead, they took me to meet Dr. Sarah Williams. She was Haven Colony's chief scientist and intelligence analyst. Zexhai stood up and walked to the window. The memory of Dr. Williams still troubled him. Dr. Williams had been studying our species since the war began. Not just our military tactics, but our biology, our psychology, our entire culture. For what purpose? Admiral Vorthak asked. To understand how to defeat us completely. Not just win battles, but end our ability to make war forever. The officers looked concerned. Dr. Williams showed me a laboratory deep underground in Haven Colony. She had been conducting experiments for over a year. What kind of experiments? General Keshina asked. She had captured samples of our technology from previous battles. Weapons, armor, communication devices, computer systems. But she was not just studying how they worked. Zexhai turned back to face the officers. She was learning how to make them better. The room was quiet for a moment. Dr. Williams had improved our own weapons and was preparing to use them against us. She showed me plasma rifles that were more powerful than anything in our arsenal. Armor that was stronger than what our best soldiers wore. The humans were planning to attack us with our own technology? Colonel Vexron asked. Improved versions of our technology. Dr. Williams had found weaknesses in our designs that even our own engineers had never noticed. Igshai sat back down. His hands were shaking slightly. But that was not the worst discovery. Dr. Williams showed me something else. Records of every battle we had fought against humans. Battle records? Admiral Vorthak asked. Complete tactical. Analyzes every move our soldiers had made. Every decision our commanders had made. Every weakness our forces had shown. General Kessner leaned forward. How detailed were these records? Dr. Williams knew our military doctrine better than most. Of our own officers. She could predict our battle plans before we made them. Zexhai walked to the corner of the room. She showed me computer simulations of future battles. Battles where human forces would use our own tactics against us, but executed better than we could execute them ourselves. Simulations? Colonel, Vexren asked. Dr. Williams had created virtual versions of our entire military. She could run practice battles and test different strategies without risking any human soldiers. The officers exchanged worried looks. In every simulation, the humans won. Not because they had better technology, but because they understood our weaknesses better than we did. Admiral Vorthak stood up. What did Dr. Williams want from you? She wanted to confirm her theories about our psychology. She had been studying how our minds work, how we make decisions, how we respond to different situations. Zexhai turned back to the officers. She asked me questions for 3 days. Not about military secrets, but about how I thought. How I felt. What motivated me to fight? Did you answer her questions? General Keshina asked. Yes. I thought I was being interrogated by an enemy. I did not realize that I was being studied by a scientist who was preparing to destroy my entire species. The room was silent for a moment. On the 3rd day, Dr. Williams showed me her final project. She called it the Human War Academy. What was that? Colonel Vexren asked. A training facility where humans were learning to fight like us, but better. She had recreated our military training programs and improved them. Zexhai sat back down heavily. I watched human soldiers practicing our own battle formations. But they moved faster than our soldiers. They communicated better. They made fewer mistakes. The humans were training to become superior versions of our own military, Admiral Vorthak said. Yes, but Dr. Williams also showed me something that made me realize the war was already over. General Keshna looked up from her notes. What did she show you? Communications from human colonies across the galaxy. Hundreds of worlds were sharing information and coordinating their defenses. Zexhai walked back to the window. Every human colony had been preparing for war while we were fighting at Haven Colony. They had been building weapons, training soldiers, and planning attacks. How many colonies? Colonel Vexran asked. Over 300. Some were colonies we had never heard of. Others were colonies we thought were uninhabited. Admiral Vorthak sat back down. The humans had been hiding their true population size. Yes, and their true military capabilities. Dr. Williams showed me production reports from human factories. They were building warships faster than we were. The officers looked shocked. Dr. Williams told me that humans had been pretending to lose the war. Every defeat had been a learning opportunity. Every retreat had been a chance to gather intelligence. The entire war was a deception? General Kishona asked. Not a deception. A education. The humans had been going to school, and we had been their teachers. HFY turned back to the officers. Dr. Williams asked me a question that I still think about every day. She asked me what would happen if 300 human colonies suddenly attacked Catherian space at the same time. What did you tell her? Colonel Vexren asked. I told her the truth. We would lose. Our military was designed to conquer primitive, species one at a time. We had never fought against an enemy that understood our tactics and had superior versions of our own technology. Admiral Vorthak stood up again. Is that when you realized the war needed to end? Yes, but Dr. Williams showed me one more thing before I was released. What? General Kishna asked. A message from the human government. They were offering us peace terms. The officers waited for him to continue. The humans were willing to end the war without attacking us, but only if we agreed to never threaten them again. Why would they offer peace when they could have won? Colonel Vexren asked. Because Dr. Williams understood something about war that we had never considered. She said that fighting makes both sides stronger, but it also makes both sides more dangerous. HFY walked to the center of the room. The humans realized that if they attacked us, we would learn from the experience. We would become better at fighting them. Eventually, we might develop weapons and tactics that could threaten them. So they chose to end the war before it escalated further, Admiral Vorthak said. Yes, Dr. Williams called it strategic mercy. End the conflict while you are ahead, before your enemy has a chance to adapt. General Keshina closed her notebook. What was your recommendation to High Command? I told them that we had two choices. Accept the human peace terms, or fight a war that would destroy both of our species. And High Command chose peace, Colonel Vexren said. Yes, because they realized what I had learned from Dr. Williams. The humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something new in the galaxy. HFY sat down for the last time. Dr. Williams told me that humans call themselves a learning species. Every challenge makes them stronger. Every enemy teaches them something new. And now they have learned everything they need to know about us, Admiral Vorthak said. Yes, the war with humans was not a military conflict. It was an education program. We thought we were conquering them, but they were studying us. The three officers sat in silence for a moment. Commander, General Keshana said finally, what do you think will happen if we ever fight humans again? HFY looked at each of the officers. If we fight humans again, we will lose. Not because they are stronger than us, but because they know us better than we know ourselves. He stood up and walked to the door. The humans learned the most important lesson of war. The best victory is the one that prevents the next war from happening. As HFY left the debriefing room, he thought about Dr. Williams' final words to him. We could have destroyed you, but then you would have learned how to destroy us. Peace is the only victory that lasts forever.